Hey everybody, it's your buddy Pete, a Turner executive producer and host of The Break It Down Show. I've got a cool episode. Anytime we can have Sebastian Junger on the show, it is always a treat. We love to have him on. He has written a new book called Freedom, and that book, I guess it's as if you're on a ruck march with him, extended ruck march for hundreds of miles from DC to Pittsburgh. And he and his friends are out and you're just talking like you would do if you were out walking along the train tracks of America. So in some regard, what they were doing was, I guess you would say, illegal, because you're not supposed to ruck march along train tracks for obvious reasons. It's very dangerous. He talks about that. Also, it's private property. But what they're doing is what they called high-speed vagrancy, or what Scott Huesing, who joins us on the episode, called undercover hobo action. So the thing about the freedom thing is as Sebastian examines this walk that he does to kind of clear his head, here comes the fucking airplane. As Sebastian clears his head from life and the things that he's had to go through as a middle-aged man, about to get a divorce and all these things, he's sort of relaying the experience of the travel, the walk, the stress it puts on your body, and then also equating that to freedom and examining freedom as a topic, whether it's the Apache and their ability to stay relevant into modern times and, moving 40, 50, 60, 70 kids moving 70 miles in a day sometimes, but also talking about the lack of structure and government to also create freedom, I should say, at the expense of freedom and at the benefit of comfort. And so comfort versus freedom and what those things mean. Really, really fascinating talk. Scott, like I said, joins me, and I know you guys are going to love it. Get his book, Freedom. It's short. It's a quick read, just like Tribe was. And it's sort of a series as he examines these topics that I think you really enjoy. Sebastian's cool. Honestly, I've got a bit of a man crush on him. All right. The other thing I'm going to say to you is save the brave, savethebrave.org. It is a great way to support us. We're trying to get some more events going on. So if you've got some idea on what you want to do, be it a band, a local brewery, you got a boat, something like that, hey, I'd love to set something up with you. I'm working on a couple of things already. So hopefully we can do the charity thing. We can all have some fun, raise some money, and also do it for a good cause. So the Save the Brave thing is not just money. It's also the ability to create some memorable events and have a good time doing it and work in service of others. All right. The other thing I would say to you is you can serve the show. If you go to breakitdownshow.com and hit the PayPal link, or if you want it, just email me. I will email you the link. It's no big deal, or text it to you. What that money does, it puts me on the road. A couple things. I'm going to be gone a lot in late July, early August, and that's in part because of the folks who already contribute, whether it's Brian or Bob or Matt, Mark. I mean, I could just keep going on. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of people that contribute. Brett, and Brad. Let's not forget Brad. So many great people. Dan, I can continue to go on. Raquel, I got to throw at least one lady in there. They put me on the road. That little bit of money, it buys me gas. It buys me a hotel room. I'm not going to live extravagantly. That's just not in the cards for me, at least right now. And so I'm going to go out. I want to go out and do hard things and show you what those look like. And that means that some of my live schedule is going to be sacrificed at the expense of that movement. I will record the shows, but I may not be able to go live if I'm really, really, really remote. Do my best to go live, but it may be that the scheduling of those 11 o'clock Pacific times that I try to hit, that may be sacrificed while I'm on the road, because the road demands things that I can't give it when I'm in the tent. And those stabilities, right? This is Sebastian. The stability of the tent in the backyard studio allows me to do 11 o'clock for the most part. But when you're on the road in the truck driving around the desert trying to get stories, you don't always get those things. So I will say this to you. I am desperate to get on the road and go tell you some stories. Bear with me if we're a little slower on the daily production side, because we're working on getting through that hurdle, but we are doing it. We are getting better at all those things. I'm able to put more on Damien and Dragon as they try to put things together. Okay, I've been yakking for a long time. Please support the show. Would you buy me coffee? Would you buy me lunch if you saw me? Just go to PayPal. $5 or $10 a month. $20, $25 makes my day. Oh my God. But do that. It's just like Patreon. We don't need Patreon to do this. We just need you and me and to work on that. So that is a great way to support the show. All right, I'm going to shut up because you know what? Sebastian Junger's on the show today. So enjoy Sebastian Junger. Whoop, whoop.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Cruz.
This is Bryce Vine.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Junger.
This is Daryl Amy.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell. Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
I'm Sebastian Junger, and this is the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, we've had Sebastian on before. It's wonderful to have him back. This time I've got Scott co-hosting with me. And just before we go too much further, I wanted to bring up Sebastian's latest book. It's called Freedom. And it seems like this is like, is it a trilogy? What would you call it? These short books that you have, like Tribe and that kind of thing. What's the impetus behind that? And is this a multi-volume set?
Well, I didn't set out. My first one-word title book was called War. And I didn't set out to write what might look like a trilogy later. I just thought I like the simple title. I like being completely like blunt and direct about what the book's about. And it's not about anything else. And so War was the first one. I remember my publisher was like, I don't know, can we really call the book War? I mean, no one's ever called a book War. I'm like, no, amazingly, no one has thought the most obvious thing in the world. No one's done it. And so then Tribe was sort of the next step. But I'm not a good chess player with my life. I don't think this many moves ahead, right? But I do react to things as I'm trying to make sense of the world and sense of my life and other people's lives. I do come to these conclusions. And my conclusion with Tribe was, we're all lacking community. What soldiers had out in combat with each other, boom, suddenly they're home and it doesn't exist. And clearly that's what humans need, is connection. And then finally with this book, Freedom, the thinking behind it, and I just came to this idea a couple of years ago, but I was thinking, what is the other? I mean, people will die to protect their children. They will die to protect their communities. Is there anything else people will die for? And there is one other thing. They will die for freedom. They will die for their ability to be autonomous and self-defining, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, physical freedom to not be in bondage. And so I thought, well, that would actually be a fine volume to examine how that works.
The way the book kind of plays out, from my perspective, it's almost as if we go on this walk that you go on with your friends, and I'm calling it a walk. It's a multi-week long journey that you guys talk about, and there's a little geography in there, there's a little bit of history, but it's as if we're just having this conversation as we go along on this 25-mile trek, and then the next day, and then the next day, and the next day.
Yeah. So what I did was, this is years ago, and it was before I thought I was going to write a book called Freedom. I set out from Washington, D.C. with a few other guys that had been in a lot of combat. A couple of them were soldiers, another was a journalist. And we walked along the railroad lines from Washington, D.C. We were going to go to New York. And then we finally got to Philly, and we thought, let's go west instead. That sounds better. And we headed for Pittsburgh. And the reason we were on the railroad lines is that there are these swaths of no man's land, right? Like there's no cops out there unless they're looking for you, which at points they were looking for us, including in a helicopter, which I still feel a little bad about. You can do sort of whatever you want. Like we were sleeping under bridges and in abandoned buildings. We were cooking over fires. If we wanted to grill meat, we'd get some railroad steel and these things called tie plates. They're super heavy that pin the railroad the rails to the cross ties. We put those on two rocks and build a fire underneath them and turn them into a big cast iron griddle, basically. We were getting our water out of creeks, walking through ghettos, through farms, through suburbs, like through the middle of America in every sense. And we called it high-speed vagrancy. And what I realized later, I mean, we had a million amazing things happen and mishaps and everything else. It was brutally hard. We were carrying 60, 70 pounds. Some days, once we did 40 miles in 40 hours, we were really grinding it out. And we broke our bodies, basically. But what I realized later is that over the course of 400 miles or so, at night, we were the only people who knew where we were, right? And that's a form of freedom. It's not the only form, but it's a sort of an important form at the kind of animal level. And so that was why I decided to incorporate an account of this trip into my narrative, my research narrative about what freedom is and how it works.
Leaving room for you, Scott, if you got a question.
Oh, of course I got questions. I think reading what you've written. You seem to have this deep-seated, burning desire that compels you to be a glutton for punishment continually. And I remember sending you the copy of my book Tribe, and it was all scribbled up. And one of the questions me and Pete always ask of you, we talk about you a lot because a lot of what you write does sink into what we do deeply. Is I asked, why didn't Sebastian join the military, and why does he do these things? What drives you to? What kind of nut job takes off and walks the railroad tracks? Who is a successful guy and it's like undercover hobo. Why do you do that? Why do you feel that need?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't remember if I said this, but we called it high-speed vagrancy, which was a sort of phrase that we came to like. And what I liked about it, I mean, technically it's illegal, right? Morally, I felt like we were okay. Like we weren't victimizing anyone with our illegal act. We were endangering ourselves, I suppose, but we were pretty careful out there. And one thing that we liked is that we were marginal. And, you go on the Appalachian Trail, like beautiful out there, but you're walking where society sort of wants you to walk. What we were doing was we were dependent on society, but we were marginal and sort of skirting the edges of it. And I liked that relationship where we were part of it, but not part of it. And where we had to think about our security every night. We had to think about if we were visible to people, because when people saw us, sometimes they called the cops. A guy shot at us in Pennsylvania, like over our heads, but we'd all been in combat, so we had a predictable reaction. Like, it's a weird country. It's a country I love, but damn, if it isn't pretty weird out there, and so we like being marginal. And the other, I was two out of the four of us were in the middle of getting a divorce, and what I knew from having been an athlete my whole life is there's an amazing sort of refuge and transformation. There's an amazing refuge in exhaustion, and an amazing transformation that can happen when you exhaust yourself over and over again and become stronger. And there's something that happened. I was a long distance runner in high school and college. I ran some pretty good times. I ran a couple of marathons in my 20s. There is something that happens when you move through the world in a kind of cadence, when your body falls into this cadence, into this rhythm. And sometimes you get this feeling that it's effortless. You get this feeling, as I say in the book, where you're in cadence when it feels easier to keep moving than to stop, when stopping seems like the harder thing. And that, to me, you're almost in a kind of sacred place. And I'm an atheist, so when I use the word sacred, I mean it sort of metaphorically, but it's a very, very special place. And I know what that can do for a person and what it could do for me. And so that was part of this. I was in my early 50s and my life was changing pretty radically. And I had a lot of things happen in combat that were catching up with me and in my life. And I thought, I need to kind of burn myself clean. I need to be in a place where I have the equivalent of nothing. And of course, I wasn't homeless. I had money in a bank account. I had a home I could go back to. It was a performance, but there is something of value in a performance. It's not completely without value. And the I don't know what would the word be, the humility you sometimes wind up with when you recognize other people looking at you like you're marginal. That's a kind of profound. There can be something kind of profound there.
That as you described the ruck marching that you were doing, for lack of a better term, that's what I think Scott and I would recognize it as. You really nailed that. I did the Nijmegen walk. It's like 100 miles over 4 days. And you're right. You have a middle distance. No one runs the 800 without the knowledge that it's going to hurt really bad, especially that from 500 meters on, it's just all guts, and you do it over and over again, but you also learn that you can take it. And so I called it the pain ball. There's 1,000 people on this road walking in Nijmegen, and all of a sudden you just grab your thigh and you're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And you're like, maybe 10 steps, maybe 20, and then it's gone. And then you'll see that pain ball bounce to somebody else, and they'll grab their neck and oh. But it moves, and it's coming. you can deal with it, and you keep going because you're in cadence. That cadence concept and understanding like thumbs under your straps or no thumbs, just to constantly take that discomfort and make it manageable so you can get to that bigger prize. Like when you do finally stop and you do sit down, changes everything.
And you do these minute adjustments. I'm glad you mentioned the thumbs under the straps. Like as your body breaks down, I would either tighten or loosen the belt a little bit, right? I would put thumbs under the straps or not. I would lean forward a little bit or not. I would sometimes when I was tired, I would go faster. And there was a kind of a mental relief in actually going faster because at least you were getting some energy from the fact that you were going faster. I don't know. It was a very, very complex mind game. And long before your body stops working, long before your body breaks down, your mind is trying to bail out the entire time, right? I mean, your mind is like this sniveling little whiner that's like offering you these little deals like, hey, why don't we just slow down a little bit and then we can make it up later in the day, I promise you. And then you have to not listen. You have to be like, sorry, like, no, now because because you're offering me little deals, now I'm not going to listen to you at all. And you're going in the other room. And when you put your mind in the other room, then you're truly liberated. Then you're free. I mean, you're free for a while from the tyranny of your feelings.
And did you? I suffer from this where I'll start to mathematically like put goals ahead of me. And you're right. Like when you slow your pace, you're like, well, now it's going to take me 9.5 hours, and that's going to hurt for 9.5 hours. I need to get stopped so I can rest and recover, so I can do this the next day. But then I get caught in the trap of that was 220 paces in the last whatever, and then I start to lose the benefit of the walk for the desire to analyze what's out there.
Yeah, you turn into this like pathetic little amateur mathematician, right? And you divide and it's all these mental games. But your body, particularly if you're an athlete or if you're a soldier, your body's loyal. Your body at the end of the day, your body will do what you tell it to do. And I love that about the body. And my book is divided into 3 sections: run, fight, and think. And they're roughly the 3 ways that people throughout history have maintained their freedom in the face of a greater power. And, the first way, the most elemental way, is just being mobile. I mean, just being faster, having more endurance, being more evasive than the group that's looking for you, whether it's the sheriff's department or, the Roman Empire. I know whatever it is, like throughout history, people have maintained their freedom by just staying out of reach of the powerful. And, good people and bad. I mean, some people that are doing that are not good people, but nevertheless, that's the sort of first strategy. And I look at the Apache. The Apache are a great example because in the Southwest, when the Spaniards arrived in the late 1500s, there were 2 kinds of society. There were the Pueblo societies, the Pueblo tribes that were agriculturalists, right? They irrigated, they had farms, they planted. They lived on these sort of like on top of these mesas on basically little fortresses, right? Totally impregnable. And then there were the nomadic peoples, the Apache and the Navajo, that were materially very poor, but they didn't have much to carry and they moved really fast. Now, who do you think stayed autonomous for longer? Of course, the Pueblos got rolled by the Spanish immediately, right? The Apache, who were renowned for being able to move 70 miles a day for days on end. They could outrun cavalry in rough country or in the heat. They maintained their autonomy almost until 1900, right? I mean, that's the year my grandmother was born. That's mobility in service of freedom.
I like to think all of us are around the same age and a lot of shared experiences. I always wonder whenever a new project that you've been working on comes out, I think I'd label you a seeker. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but we got these demons, through all the shared trauma and, compiled trauma that we accumulate through life. And Pete and I often talk about that. And I say this, it's become rhetoric to a degree, but we don't own those words in the military. Like loss and sacrifice and trauma. Everybody can bring those on. All of us compartmentalize it some way. And then you go out and you walk the railroad tracks, and there's a lot of risk, more risk than is needed to purge these demons or whatever it is you're doing. And it seems like a sine wave that we go through. And I always ask myself, what age, I'm over 50 now, will enough be enough? Will I stop seeking this high risk behavior, despite having a family and people to take care of and responsibilities? But how do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I now have a family. I'm incredibly happily married, and I have 2 little girls, 4 and 1.5. And I would do anything to protect them, and I would do anything to protect them from anything happening to me, right? Because they need a dad. So that means that my whatever my predilection for risk is, or adventure, or whatever. I mean, I'm 59. As you get older, that changes also. But now it doesn't matter. I mean, my primary job is to make sure that they have everything they need to turn into the happiest, most complete possible people. And so I mean, I would defend them from anything with a shovel if I had to, but I'm not going to take any risks. Forget it, and I don't even want to be away from them. And I love being out the railroad lines, and I got to say, like, I think the risks were pretty minimal. Like, every once in a while there was a situation, but basically I think we were okay. We were super smart about it. Like, that environment's a dangerous environment, but every environment's dangerous if you're stupid, right? And we were very, we tried to be very, very smart about what the risks were. There were a couple of times where I thought, and in combat as well, a couple of times where I thought, oh my God, if I get unlucky, I'm dead right now. And but we learned from that.
That's true of the ocean as well. I mean, you can become really sick. You can be safe as houses and having a great time until that boat flips over or any problem at all, and you end up in the water, because now you're just a coconut floating in this massive thing that's going to kill you if it gets even any more of a chance. And the same is really true for the out of doors. Like, if you're out there on your own, I mean, we're 100 years away from a president's son dying from a blister, right? So we've conquered a lot of things that used to kill us, but that doesn't mean that anything. You talked about the threat of the train going by and all the, and you've been by helicopters when they land. I mean, it can be a dangerous place.
Yeah. I mean, there was a couple of things going on out there. First of all, I found out later that some of the load straps that tie down like timber and stuff, or logs or whatever on these flatbeds, can come loose. And what happens is they just dance along the side of the train going 80 miles an hour, and so you can be off. I mean, obviously you're off the track. You're not on you're not between the rails when a freight comes through, obviously. But you can be near it and cut in half, and I didn't really know that. There was one engineer who, a log or a piece of timber came loose from an oncoming train, and it was hanging out sideways. And the engineer in the front of the train, it was another freight train, they were crossing, right? He dropped to the ground. I mean, he basically slipped a right cross from a boxer, right? I mean, essentially he dropped under the log and it came through his compartment, right? And he survived because he slipped the ultimate punch. So, it's dangerous out there. I mean, but the other thing, we didn't want to be arrested. Whatever. We had the engineers would call us in if they saw us walk along the railroad. It's illegal, right? So they'd call us in. So we had to be very aware. We had to be completely plugged into our environment, and we got totally tuned up. And I don't know, I can't even explain how we did it, but sometimes those trains would go so fast that by the time you hear them, they're on you. So what we realized is you could kind of feel them before you could hear them or see them. Obviously, you could feel something. There's like something heavy and fast is coming down on you, and you could feel it from like a mile out. And we look at each other like, "Do you feel that?" Yeah, I feel that. We get into the underbrush, and then this thing would come crashing through. I don't know exactly what we were picking up on, but we were tuned up, man, and that felt like combat. Like, wow, I am part of the environment right now. I'm picking up on things. I don't even know how I'm feeling it, but I am feeling it. And that, I mean, that's an amazing feeling. Like that gave me that old feeling of being like perfect for the environment, like perfect for the environment that I'm in right now. And that's a very old human feeling, and it feels awesome.
That is an irreplicable feeling that we share. And you talking about the risks too is, like the manager at the grocery store would never think of well, it's kind of safe out there. I could do this too, and then go back to my normal doldrums of daily life. But I love the trains as from a 30,000 foot view as this big metaphor for why you wrote this book, as it goes, this multi-ton train traveling at 60 miles an hour, and you have this epiphany of how would I stop this? And you come to the realization of how it can only be stopped. You craft up a few ideas, and then you realize there's only one thing that can stop that. And then you tie that to what's going on in our country right now, what's going on with this nation. And I love that. And what was that you figured out was going to stop that trend?
Yeah, thank you. So we were, one night we were along the Juniata River in Pennsylvania, which I found out later was the sort of main thoroughfare for settlers in the 1700s heading west towards, what was called Indian country. Looking for freedom, right? Freedom from the government, from the church, whatever. And what they found out there is a brief detour, but it's interesting. What they found out there was, yes, they were free from the government. They're in the wilderness. They're in Indian territory, but they were also in a huge amount of danger. And the way they dealt with that danger was that they had a kind of mutual defense pact with each other, which meant that you didn't have a choice. You had to fight, right? If there was an Indian war, if the Indians, sort of attacking along the frontier, all the settlers collected at the stockade, right? And, excuse me. And if you were an adult male, or really an adult, anyone over 14 had to fight because everyone's lives depended on it. And so if you were an adult male and you didn't at all times carry a rifle, a scalping knife, and a tomahawk, you were mocked and you were cast out of the society, because you had to be ready to fight at a moment's notice. And if you weren't, you were not part of the community. In other words, you were free from the government, but you were dependent on your community, and they were dependent on you, and you had to conform to its norms. And if you didn't, you were not part of that community, and you were out, right? So the ancient human sort of conundrum about freedom is that you have to be well organized enough and sort of obedient enough to defend yourselves against an enemy. But then that means that you might be subject to the tyranny of the group. And there is no way out of that trap. So what you have to do is institute rules of fairness within the group that really respects everyone's individual rights, up until the point where those rights make the group less safe. It's so obvious, right? So you do not have the right to drive on the left-hand side of the road. That's not your right. I don't care how free you think you are or what you think your rights are. You have to drive on the right-hand side of the road, because you're going to kill people and you're going to get arrested. And the community has the right to arrest you for violating that rule, right? That's just how it goes with humans. So to the train metaphor, one night we were along the Juniata River and we were bedding down and the tracks were 50 feet away. And when those freights come through at night and the passenger trains, oh my God, it sounds like God's coming at you through the woods, right? It's an unholy sound, and it feels like no matter where you are, it feels like it's going to run you over. You literally check around you to make sure you're not somehow accidentally on the tracks. It is so damn loud, right? And this howl comes through, and this thing comes through, and it's unbelievable feeling. And I said to the guys, what would it take? It's 20,000 tons of freight or something like that. I can't remember the number. It's very, very heavy, going 70 miles an hour. I said to I just can't put it out there, what would it take to stop that in its tracks, right? Instantly. What kind of massive wall would it take to bring that thing to just pile into itself, stop it instantly? And my buddy Brendan said, and he was so brilliant, he was like, oh, that's easy, man. It would take the same freight train going in the other direction on the same track. They, weighs the same, going the same speed. And they would stop each other instantly. And I had this idea later, because I was thinking about what America, which is the most powerful military ever, right? And we can talk about why that wasn't enough to defeat the Taliban. But the most powerful military ever, what would it take to destroy us? ISIS isn't going to do that. Al Qaeda's not going to do that. Russia's not going to do that. Only we can do it. And it's the same thing. Only the United States running headlong into itself can bring itself to a stop. And that's something we almost, in my opinion, that we almost saw on January 6th, was the United States almost destroying itself. Luckily, there was enough momentum on the right side, in the right train, to have that not happen. But, it didn't feel good to me as someone who loves democracy. I mean, what I love about this country, I don't love this country just because it's America. I love this country because America is a democracy. I love democracy is what I love. And America is a shining example of it. And that's why I love America. That was a close call, in my opinion. I didn't realize even that day how close it was, but that was a close call.
It for sure is. And it's also indicative of us starting to try to fight over what freedom is going to be. I mean, no matter what the outcome of the election is, there are tens of million people on both sides that are disagreeing completely on what freedom is and how to approach it. And so we're kind of like we're slowly pulling the screws out of the machine to see like how long it goes till it shakes itself apart. I mean, if it's the 6th, it'll be the next thing next, and it'll be the thing after that, because we seem to refuse to want to work towards consensus and to ameliorate problems. We want to just continue to complain about things and tear ourselves apart, So our trains might even break down before they even smash into each other, because we're a shambles in a lot of ways.
What I would say, and I'm a Democrat, so I'm aware that I might have a sort of like bias in me, and definitely call me out on it, because I'm also a journalist. I'm more of a journalist than I am a Democrat. And journalists, the ultimate definition of journalism for me is someone who's willing to disappoint themselves with the truth about something, And so, of course, I have opinions, but really my ultimate loyalty is to the truth. So I just ask to be called out if I'm in error.
Sure.
But, what I would say is that the Republican Party, and I have some very good friends who are Republicans, the Republican Party has won one popular election in the last 30 years or something like that. They are disincentivized. I mean, because of that electoral truth, they are actually disincentivized to be loyal to a democratic process, because more and more a democratic process is seeing them lose elections, right? That's a very, very dangerous position for America to be in. And I feel like one of the reasons that something like 70% of Republicans think that the election was rigged and that Biden's not the legitimate president, something they don't feel about senators and representatives who won office, right? They only feel that about the White House. I think one of the reasons they're thinking that is because they don't, at the moment, have an electoral strategy that will turn that reality around and give them a popular vote win for the White House. So basically what we're asking the Republicans to do is to accept an indefinite period of being out of office, because they believe in the democracy so deeply that they'd rather be out of office than lose the democracy. That's a lot to ask from any party. And what I would beseech them, right, to save not only their own party, but the democracy, is figure out a way to talk about policy where you're more appealing and you can start winning popular elections. Like, figure out how to do it. That's the long range plan. The short range plan is to reject reality, and that never works for very long.
That is so true. Scott?
I had a question as I was reading through this. I mean, there's so many great lessons in this book, but I think, the question was, is freedom supposed to be this big parable for something else? Because there's so many stories about people in it, which I love how you have that skill, because the book itself is this very succinct, didactic story and compilation of stories that illustrate so many important lessons. And it's jammed into this tiny little book, like 45,000 words. You have such a gift for that. Is that the end? Is it about the train? Is that about what you want people to learn?
Well, yeah. I mean, so the book is, as I said, divided into 3 sections: run, fight, and think. The high-speed vagrancy part that's not the point of the book. I mean, it was an intense experience we had that I think illuminates an aspect of freedom a kind of physical freedom that's hard won because we carried everything we needed on our backs. On when we were walking through a 115 degree heat index, one guy started to sort of physically fail, and another guy took his pack and strapped it onto his pack and walked with 2 packs, right? I mean, if you're going to be free in a group like that, like the Apache, you got to be willing to suffer, and not only suffer for your freedom, suffer for the guy on your right or your left, right? So that's what that part's about. But really, the more profound point about freedom is these 3 mechanisms for maintaining it. And one is to just be scarce, right? I mean, it's worked for nomads for centuries, for millennia. Nomads are very, very free people. They're also very poor. And you can have a pretty articulate conversation about the correlation between lack of possessions and freedom. And wealth is a kind of freedom also, but wealth can create a dependency on itself. And of course, dependency is not freedom. So it's this constant sort of moving target. I talked to a guy who'd done 2 or 3 decades in prison for committing a terrible crime, right? And he reformed himself in prison. He educated himself, an amazing man, and he eventually got let out on good behavior. And I asked him one question that felt sort of self-indulgent and silly. I said, is it possible to be more free in prison than out of prison? And he looked at me like I was crazy. He was like, of course it is. Are you kidding? Like, you can't be an addict in prison. And addiction is the ultimate loss of freedom. And that happens on the outside. It doesn't happen on the inside. And he said, even distraction. He's like, people are distracted out there. They're on their iPhones and they got a million things going on. They're not thinking about the important stuff. He said, in prison, you got nothing but time. And eventually, you will have an honest conversation with yourself about who you really are and what you're doing in there. And until you have that conversation, you're not free. And people on the outside don't have a need to have that conversation. On the inside, eventually you're going to have it. And so, it really depends how you phrase it. My last the last section called think. I mean, of course, for humans, unlike any other mammal, the smaller person or the smaller group can actually defeat a larger group. That's unique to humans, right? Now, I hate the Taliban, but the fact that that insurgents without an air force, without artillery, without tanks, sometimes without boots, could defeat the United States for 20 years, right? That means that the empire doesn't always win, and that allows for the possibility of freedom for smaller groups. But the last section, think, is about how do you maintain your freedom within your group. You're not outrunning it. You're not trying to overthrow the government or defeat the U.S. military or whatever. You're trying to change your society so that it's more free. How do you do that? And that requires thinking. And there is no way to think your way to a free society where everyone doesn't have equal rights. And one of the things I didn't like about January 6th was basically these people were saying, you know what, everyone who voted for Biden, they actually don't have rights in this democracy. We're going to decide who's the president. That is actually the exact opposite of freedom. People use the word freedom because it's such an enduring human value that as soon as you say, oh, I'm fighting for my freedom, it's expected everyone will back off. Like, oh, you're fighting for your freedom. Like, okay, yeah, no problem. I won't question you any further. The word is horribly misused. And so, its use must be really, really scrutinized and examined because people use that word precisely to deprive the society of freedom. I mean, that's when it's used. It's a very, very suspect word.
One of the things that we've done on the show is a project called the Prison Chronicles, and I got to talk to a lot of murderers that have rehabilitated themselves and they're out now. And a couple of truths have come out of that. And look, this is a small sample size. I'm not a social scientist, but when you ask these guys, like, when did it turn for you? When did you figure out that you were part of the problem and it was up to you to become free, even if you were never going to get out? And the number's right around 11 years. So and then I realized that I was the source of my problems. And, and they got there because they're going to group therapy. They're going to OG therapy. And all these guys were so wise in how they saw things. And they also said that I wasn't prepared to get out until basically the last time I went before that parole board. And I realized a couple of things. One is that parole board is my advocate. They're not against me.
Right.
They are vouching for me. And when I realized that, when I could accept everything that was going to be thrown at me, then I was ready. And this wisdom that came out of these guys, because they'd gone through this impossible thing a lot of times with no real clear path to actual external freedom. Right. And the other thing I want to add into this is, from talking to a lot of villagers, across a lot of different conflict zones, how someone defines freedom is very important if we wish to try to break chains for people, whether they're internal chains here in America or external. Having someone understand what freedom is from your point of view and you from theirs is vital if you're ever going to try to repair a system that is wanting for freedom, is to understand, like the Bush Doctrine talks about freedom being a universal value. Yeah, okay, yeah, but not really, because there's 5,000. It's like defining love with one way to define love. Freedom is the same thing, I think.
Well, it's a universal value with a million different definitions, right? I mean, someone said to me, but every society values autonomy and freedom for the individual within the group, and for the group, surrounded by potential enemies. I talk about the Yamnaya, which were a nomadic group from the Russian steppe, the Eastern steppe, 5,000 years ago, and they would go into battle on horse-drawn chariots, swinging battle axes, and using horses in combat was new then, right? So they were often facing people who had never even seen a horse before, and they were basically and they traveled without women. They were just men. They're basically like the first motorcycle gang. And they cruised, were right through Europe, right, and into Iberia.
Right.
This is 5,000 years ago. And within 100 years, they killed all of the men in Iberia, every man, right? And we know this because of the DNA. If you look at the DNA of modern Spaniards and Portuguese, somehow, I don't know how, I'm not a geneticist, but they can tell that the male line completely dropped off 5,000 years ago. And clearly they mated with the women. And so those men, and arguably the women as well, lost their freedom to the Yamnaya because they were not able to defend themselves, right? So someone asked me, I was in Afghanistan for many years and off and on, and someone said, well, the Taliban looks like they might take over when the U.S. pulls out, and I don't know who's going to be free in that country when the U.S. pulls out, and I said, and I want to reiterate, I loathe the Taliban because they are so oppressive and have no regard for human rights, right? Just to reiterate that. But what I said to him is, the Taliban will be free in Afghanistan. In their opinion. Yeah. Right? They're like, oh, now we're free. The infidel is out of our country. The big empire has packed up their tents and gone home. Like, we're free now, right? So we have to understand that there is not a universal definition of freedom. It really is defined by the people themselves. And that guy who was in prison, had he gotten out and fell back into drug addiction, he might very well say, I'm not free anymore, right? And that might be anathema to the thinking of another person who thinks being in prison's loss of freedom. But I'm not going to tell that guy he's wrong. You know what I mean? Like, there are many definitions.
Right. Yeah. And in a lot of ways, we were the insurgents in Afghanistan. We came in and tried to install a new system. By the way, that system has basically failed, and the Taliban are going to be back. Maybe they'll be a kinder, gentler Taliban, maybe not. But that, we failed to realize that we were trying to change a reality that we were refusing to accept and to understand.
And I want to reiterate that the first definition of freedom is that you're safe, right? And you're physically safe. And that's where I think some of, the sort of Black Lives Matter conversation rightfully comes in. The argument is, and I'm not coming down on either side of this argument, but I think what they're saying is, look, particularly young Black men actually are not safe. They are not safe in their own country, particularly when they're at a traffic stop with the cops, right? So I'm not going to weigh in on that other than to say if they're right about in that assessment, then they are right in talking about their freedom. But to rewind for a moment, I looked at a street gang in Chicago in the 1960s, and they were called the Vice Lords. And they were formed, they were in a very violent, crime-ridden part of Chicago, the Lawndale section. I don't know what it's like now, but back in the 60s, it was very violent. And they were surrounded by these other street gangs, and the young men, it was African-American community, the young men who were not affiliated with the street gang were individually at enormous risk of being beaten up, robbed, killed by all these organized gangs. So they formed their own street gang called the Vice Lords. And is this freedom or not? They controlled territory. Because they were a collective entity, they were able to defend themselves against the predations of these other gangs. But the one requirement, and again, it was exactly like the settlers on the frontier, the one requirement, absolute requirement, was that you fight. And if there's another vice lord in a fight, however bad the odds are, 10-1, 20-1, it doesn't matter. You go help that guy. And if you don't, then you're not a vice lord. And they had a very simple solution for that problem. They didn't beat you up. They didn't whatever. They just put you in a car and they drove you into the middle of the territory of a rival gang, and they just pushed you out of the car. And you had to make your way home by yourself, and you wouldn't get there, right? So that, right there, you have this sort of dichotomy of like, okay, I'm free because I'm safe because I'm in this group, but I owe the group my life. And that brings up the bigger conversation about, as an American citizen, what do you owe the group? What do we as citizens owe this country? And there's a big, argument. Do you owe your country the inconvenience of wearing a mask or not? I don't know what the answer is, but that's the eternal argument about, okay, this is the group that's keeping me safe. Now, what do I owe it? And, I think part of the problem is that in a big country like this, it's very hard to feel sort of part of it because it's so damn big. All the sort of survival tasks have been outsourced to specialists, to professionals, right? In a platoon or in a hunter-gatherer group or in a street gang, it's very, very clear what you owe the group and that you owe your survival to the group. So what do you owe it in return? It's very, very clear. In a big country like this that's so safe, it's so huge, what do we owe? I think one way to act, to perform, I was talking about the value of performance, to perform your relationship with this country. I mean, maybe you're 59 like me, you can't join the military, you're not going to join the military. What are you going to do? Like pick up litter? But how can you perform your relationship with the group in a meaningful way? And I would say that there's 3 ways to do it. They're completely symbolic, but they're also important. I almost died last summer. I had an undiagnosed aneurysm in my pancreatic artery, and it ruptured out of the blue one day. It ruptured. Sorry about the sounds of New York out there.
That's all right.
And I lost 90% of my blood.
Oh my God!
Before I got to the ER, my hemoglobin was 1.2. I mean, my dead father was in front of me trying to comfort me as I died. I have very strange memories of this. They put 10 units in my neck and brought me back, and they managed to save me. But I was as good as dead, right? I was saved by 10 people, 10 units of blood, right? So the great thing about blood is it makes no distinctions, right? Republican, Democrat, black, white, rich, poor, whatever. Like, it's just blood. We're all humans. We all need blood. That's the ultimate truth about what we are. So donate blood. It makes you part of this whole deal. And you're going to save someone's life, and your life might be saved by someone else. That is awesome, right? And the second thing is vote. Vote every time. Like, it means your country needs you and you need your country, right? And the final way of demonstrating your participation in this whole crazy experiment that we have going on is serve on jury duty. Don't try to wiggle out of it. Serve on jury duty. Jury duty means that we are not a society that's tyrannized by the decision of one person. One person cannot decide the fate of another person. That is tyranny, right? And the jury duty means grand juries and jury trials mean that it's a collective decision. We all come to a wise decision about the one. And if you do those 3 things, I promise you will feel more like you're a part of this country.
I'm actually supposed to be on jury duty today, but because of some medical appointment situations, I was able to come and do this show. But I agree with you 100%. If you get jury duty, it's your obligation. Someone's life is on hold. Some family's been victimized, whatever it is, and they're waiting for 12 people to sit in that box. And yeah, it's uncomfortable. So is charity, by the way, and you have to go out and do these things for the greater good of people. You have to invest in that stuff. It's just like that walk, right? When you're out there on mile 35 and you got 10 more to go, or in the Apache's case, you're not even halfway. It's like you have to invest in that discomfort, that pain to get to where the community is safer when you're trying to outrun a cavalry or hide in the Chiricahuas.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right.
I like how you always refer to what we have here as this empire, because I use that term a lot. And it's been in a couple of talks I've done where we were talking about this, this experiment democracy. And I'm always saying, there's only one kind of democracy. It's democracy. It's not American democracy. It's not Afghan democracy. It's not Iraq democracy. It's just democracy. There's only one flavor. And we were doing a thing a couple years back with Rick Davis and Marty Eastman and Carl Malantis on C-SPAN. And I always like to remind people that, our influence in the Middle East and that whole region is really been trying, because we never defined what winning is. And you've been there, I've been there, Pete's been there, so many thousands of people have been there. We never really understood or defined winning. So to think that Afghanistan is going to become some Switzerland like that, that's just not going to happen, in my opinion. But the empire itself, in this big, huge locomotive, this freight train that continues to move forward, and we think we've got all this progress, I always remind people that there's been a lot of other empires around, the British, the Romans, and they lasted for 500 years. So this 254-year experiment that we're piddling around with, I always tell people that the clock is ticking. And if we don't shore up those lines and we don't come together as a unified nation, we're going to have those same problems. If we think we're immune to those problems that the other empires had, we're doomed to repeat those same mistakes, sadly. And I think what you just said too ties all that together so fabulously, because we three absolutely understand that unifying fluid of blood that keeps us together. And being in the military and being connected to the military, who understands is that there's no other organization that's more diverse ethnically or religiously or sexually oriented or politically than the military, who makes up such a small percentage of the American population. Yet at the end of every day, we accomplish the mission and win. What are your thoughts on the length of this empire?
Well, I mean, in the framework of the past, I'd say 100 years, democracies have shown themselves to be amazingly enduring. I mean, ironically, what doesn't last very long is fascism, which is weird because fascists are obsessed with control and with power, right? They try to control every variable. They suppress the vote. They lie about elections. They imprison their rivals, their adversaries. They demonize the press. They do absolutely everything they can to consolidate control. They put their, friends and family into the, into the sort of heads of government, different branches of government. They try to control absolutely everything. People like Saddam Hussein, Franco, Stalin. I mean, this is how fascists work, right? And it never lasts very long. I mean, as the president of Czechoslovakia said in the late 1930s, in the run up to World War II, he said dictators look good until the last 5 minutes. That's what happens to dictators. And the other thing that I read, this wonderful writer named John Whitaker, who documented the rise of fascism in the 30s. He made this amazing point. He said the fundamental weakness of fascism is its need to appear strong. and its insistence that it's strong. And so the result is that fascist regimes often don't even last the lifespan of the dictator, of the leader, and rarely transfer effectively to the son or what have you. Democracies, on the other hand, are very long lasting, and so it's possible that we have the formula for success in a way that can last. The Roman Empire was not a democracy, obviously. I mean, it had democratic elements, but the formula that we have right now, may be very enduring, but it has to contain some core things. The gap between rich and poor cannot get too extreme. There's a sort of sweet spot of a sort of moderate difference between rich and poor that makes for very powerful empires. If it gets too extreme, it's prone to collapse. And the other problem, and I think what we see is that people in this country look at the relationship between corporations and lobbyists and Washington and the big conglomerates, the Amazons, big, huge, sprawling corporate empires like that. And they basically see a rigged system where wealthy people augment their wealth and everyone else is sort of out of the game. They're not even at the poker table. And I think some of the real populist rage that Donald Trump was able to tap into was basically that, where we're all sort of realizing that economic, democratically we're a free country, economically increasingly less so. So that has to be rectified if this is going to remain a stable entity. And, where exactly did Mitch McConnell get his tens of millions of dollars? Really where? I'm a Democrat, but I could easily be a Republican and ask that question. Like, are you kidding? Like, how do you guys do business down there, right? There's Democrats that are just as bad, obviously. And but the other thing is that the peaceful transfer of power is a sacred thing, right? If you can't transfer power peaceably, the democracy will not last, right? You cannot reject the results of a vote the way Franco did in 1936 and say we're going to use force to reclaim the honor of the country. Like, democracy will collapse immediately if people try to do that, and that is the opposite of freedom. So, that has to be the central ethos of both parties, is that the highest ideal is the peaceful transfer of power and the respect for elections. And anything less than that is basically a road to fascism.
Everybody should get Freedom. The link for it is here on the screen. If you're listening on the podcast side, it'll be in the show notes. Get all of Sebastian's books, by the way. I love Perfect Storm was fantastic. I mean, we talked about this last time, but your breakdown of what a storm starts like, and it's just a small thing, but the energy goes into the water, and that made me look at combat in a different way too. I could apply that model to understanding things. And I want to go back a few minutes of time. We talked about security or safety for Black families. Well, I learned this in Afghanistan from talking to locals. There are 3 elements to security for them, right? Can dad project himself out to work and come back safely? If he can't, they're not leaving the compound. When he leaves the compound, will the compound be safe? And if that satisfaction isn't met, dad still can't leave. And then to get kids to be able to project out to school and leave the compound and go to school and come back. If you couldn't satisfy those 3 things, which is really complex and hard to do, then you didn't have safety and security. And the other thing is that the specter is always worse than the actual problem itself. And so there's a huge affect versus effect problem where you can, and we're great at this, we can brief our success every day, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or a brigade, armored brigade, we're winning, and then you go out there and you look at the affect and you're not even playing the game. And it's hard to get these things right. So we should all participate. I would say vote out all incumbents because, people shouldn't have tens or hundreds of millions of dollars from being in Congress. It should be not a sacrifice, but it shouldn't be a place to enrich yourself. And to understand that these problems are within our grasp. The root, and you're so great at words, the root of democracy and a republic, there's the powers with the people if we choose to put it to work. That's right. And if you have a beef with
the results of an election or a law or a regulation, there is recourse within a democracy, right? I mean, there's the courts and there's the ballot box. What there is not in a free society is, going to the Michigan State House with a bunch of machine guns and defying civil order because you're unhappy with an election. Like that's actually not on the menu in a free society. It just isn't. And both parties really must condemn that kind of thing as a threat to the freedom of all of us. And I don't hear it coming loudly enough from the Republicans, like that's not okay in our country. Briefly after January 6th, but then that quieted down again. And I'm, my father was a refugee from 2 wars. He grew up in Spain, and he left Spain when Franco came in, and when he was 13, and he went to France, and he left France when the Germans came in, and he came to this country, and as he said to me, the fascism will never come to America. It's too great a country. He was a physicist. He was a very smart man, and I think he's right. And I wonder what he would have thought on January 6th, and I think he would have smiled and said, "I told you, not happening."
I got to ask a question for John since he wasn't able to get here really fast. He wanted to know what your current state of boxing is. Are you still strapping on the gloves? You still out sparring or anything, or have those days passed you by?
No, I'm still doing it. I mean, COVID shut down the gym that I used to go to, Mendez Boxing on 26th Street in Manhattan. And so that closed. I'm hoping they'll reopen, but I have a couple of guys that I work with I get up at 5 a.m. and we box in a playground, actually, spar a little bit. And, then I got a guy that I train with sometimes. So, yeah, it's COVID put a dent in it. But, yeah, listen, I'm 59. I almost died last year. The doctor said the reason I survived, I mean, I had something that very few people survive, and the reason I survived was because I was in really good shape. My heart shape saved my life and allowed my daughters to have a father. So yeah, I'm not stopping that.
Thankful for that. Hey, Scott, do you have any final questions or thoughts?
Yeah, I think Sebastian said behind here, you almost made the whole show without saying COVID.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you guys.
He said that we almost went a whole show without saying COVID.
That's right. That's right. Sorry. Almost made it.
Yeah. No, we're good, though. We're getting past most of it. Everybody get out there and get your vaccination so we can all get back to normal-ish. Anything in closing it all from you, Sebastian?
It's a pleasure to talk to you guys. And, I love having a conversation where everyone's minds are open to both ways of seeing the world, a liberal and a conservative way. Both, this country is at its greatest, but those two are in balance. And, that's what I pray for this country, is that we regain that balance.
Yeah, same. I'm all about that. And I'm glad to admit that I'm a hypocrite. So if you think I've contradicted myself, I have. I'm sorry. I work on getting better. All right, stand by for a second.